Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here with me again this week. I'm always so grateful for each of you who tunes in on a weekly basis, and I hope you're having huge takeaways from each episode. This week's episode will surely deliver some of those. Today, I am chatting with my friend Dr. Tyna Moore all about COVID and what we can do to help build our resilience and best protect ourselves from adverse outcomes of future COVID variants. Dr. Tyna is a leading expert in holistic regenerative medicine and creating resilient health. Traditionally and alternatively trained in science and medicine as both a naturopathic physician and chiropractor, she brings a unique perspective to those wishing to build a more robust foundation in their health and well-being. She is a podcast host, author, speaker, kettlebell devotee, and mother. She's a fierce advocate for health autonomy and personal responsibility, which she helps others improve through her many offerings at drtyna.com and on her podcast, The Dr. Tyna Show. If what Dr. Tyna shares on this episode resonates with you, please come let us know on Instagram. I'm at Nicole M. Jardim, and she is at Dr. Tyna. That's DRTYNA. We welcome your feedback. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you on the other side. Hi, Tyna. Thank you for being here with me.
Yes, Nicole, my pandemic texting buddy. I'm so happy to finally be talking to you face to face.
I know, same here. I know. I've been thinking about this episode for a long time now because there is a lot that we want to talk about, including metabolic healing and health and hormone balancing, as well as COVID stuff. So yeah, we're going to run the gamut today.
I love it. I'm excited to be here.
Same. So I was thinking about this, your posts on COVID and how viruses work in general made you very popular in the beginning of the pandemic. And possibly you were also not very liked because of some of the things you said. And throughout the majority of this pandemic, you've continued to share what I consider to be really important life-saving information, over these past 2 years. But what I always found so interesting is how much pushback you continue to get because of the nature of your content. Like, what do you think was so triggering to people? Like, what was so upsetting?
I don't necessarily know. For one, I think that they were being fed one narrative that made them feel safe, and I was countering it with facts. Everything that I've said has come to fruition. Everything. Yeah. Like, I haven't been wrong because I wasn't pulling anything out of my butt. It was all like, this is how viruses work. And I think from the get-go, coming out and say, I always think I'm doing someone a favor by giving them the truth. And I realize that not everybody wants the truth. And so coming out and saying, everybody's going to be exposed, everybody's probably going to contract this, that was met with so much vitriol and pushback, which I thought was really surprising. And I've had to step back and start studying psychology throughout this to understand human behavior. And people just really they don't like being met with an idea that counters what their narrative is in their head. So if they bought into the narrative that was being fed them by the propaganda machine, then they were very hesitant to hear what I had to say. And they thought, if I stay home, if I lock up, if I stay 6 feet apart, then I'll be safe. It'll be okay. If I wear 3 masks, if I take all the vaccines and boosters, I'll be safe. And just by the nature of basic sciences, which seems to have gone out the door as of 2020, the way that viruses work, the way that these vaccines work, the way that masks work, it just didn't add up to what they had been sold.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think that in 2020, it became particularly apparent that people were very married to a certain way or a certain belief system or a certain narrative, and there was no getting through. And then I feel like the level of arguing online and, like you said, vitriol online just escalated to a point that I don't even know if there's any coming back from that.
No, I don't think so. I think that people who are very much bought into this are going to be very much bought into this. And there really is no getting around an aerosolized virus. There's just that's not feasible. And so the way that this was handled on a global scale, I think, was really a crime against humans in general. We were lied to and people believed it and they bought in. And I'm not saying the virus isn't real, and I'm not saying that it wasn't dangerous to some, but we saw very early on that things were not adding up. And I mean, I was talking to my strength and conditioning coach yesterday, and he's a jujitsu guy. And I was telling him all the studies that I have talked about in my Substack blog, in my emails, on Instagram about exercise, and how significantly protective it is against COVID. Just the act of big studies, well done, big studies early on in the pandemic were coming out showing if you exercised regularly going up to the pandemic, depending on the amount of time, it really didn't even matter how much, somewhere, I mean, if you piecemeal it all together, somewhere around 150 minutes a week of who even cares what kind of movement, your chances of even contracting the disease go down significantly, let alone ending up in hospital or on ventilator. And if you do exercise, the risk of ending up in a severe situation is pretty slim. And now we have outliers, of course. We have those folks who knows what they're eating. They're eating a high inflammatory diet, perhaps. They're drinking a lot, who knows? And so, of course, we have outliers, and those are what make it on the news. And everyone says, well, a healthy person, this one healthy person, so everything you're saying must not be true. And it's these thinking in absolutes, I think, that get people in trouble. People don't like nuances.
No, tell me.
This is this is nuanced, right? And so there's no black and white, and people feel safe when there's a black or white answer, a very clear cut answer. If I do this, then I will certainly be safe. That just doesn't exist. And so I've been beating the drum around metabolic health and getting healthy. And this coach is new to me. He has no idea what I've been doing the past few years. And so I was trying to explain it to him, and he was just in utter shock. He's like, wait, there's studies showing that if you exercise, that your risk of poor outcomes is, improved. And I was like, yeah, there's lots of studies, dude. And I've been sharing them with so much pushback. And he was just flabbergasted when I told him the amount of pushback. I mean, I've received death threats. Clearly this narrative was not to get out. And that's when I knew something smelled off, was if we had this data early on, if we had data from day one coming out of China saying that diabetic and obese folks were at significantly higher risk, and yet the health authorities were doing nothing to protect those people. I was being accused of being a fat shamer and ableist, all these terrible words, but I was like, the real villain is the health authorities here who are not trying to protect and help these people or tell them that there's something that they can do, because all of these conditions that are being hit, these folks that are being hit the hardest are generally lifestyle conditions. And so not even supplying education. I mean, I was thinking back, I don't know how old you are, but I remember like after school specials and Schoolhouse Rock and all of these ways that we used to be educated on television through different, programs that they would have. And why weren't we making it fun to get healthy and get in shape while we were being locked down, when we had data showing that that's absolutely what needed to happen to protect an individual? So it's been wild.
Dude, it has been wild. I mean, I've witnessed what a lot of the pushback that you've gotten, and so much from others as well who are in the health and wellness space, just trying to sort of like cut through the noise. And what's really interesting is that I'm finally seeing ads that talk about obesity and diabetes as being risk factors for severe COVID. But the call to action is still to just go and get vaccinated instead of doing something about these very treatable conditions, which is exactly what you're talking about. And in fact, Hayden was having a conversation with a family friend the other day who had, I think, probably our age, like mid to late 40s, maybe 50s. And, she had never in 2.5 years heard about diabetes and obesity as being the comorbidities that are putting people, or most people, in the hospital who have COVID. And she was stunned by what he was sharing with her. And so I feel like in our world, in our little wellness bubble, we tend to just assume that people have generally heard about this, but apparently not.
Right. I mean, it's like new news for people, and it's quite shocking new. Well, my strength and conditioning coach, you think of all people, he would know what the studies have been saying, and he just didn't. He also believed that the vaccine would help you not transmit it to others. He's like, well, the vaccine helps protect others. And I'm like, that's incorrect. Also, that's been incorrect since day one. The Pfizer and Moderna studies never actually even showed that.
But it was never really made clear to us in the beginning either, that particular thing.
And the propaganda that I still see, I just got something from my my health insurance company the other day, and it said, do it for your family. And it was a young girl hugging her grandmother. How could we infer that propaganda, right? That could be do it for your family because they don't want you to get sick and die. But this young girl in the picture her risk of dying of COVID is like slim and none. She was a healthy, fit, lean woman. And then secondarily, what they were inferring, I'm guessing, is that you do it to protect grandma, which we know is incorrect. Right. That's misinformation. So this is the message that's out there, and people don't want to hear it. And maybe it's because at this point, I think a lot of people have been bamboozled and they're mad. If they find out or they believe what you and I are saying right now, it would be too much to process, and it would cause anger because there's a disconnect in what they've been fed and believed and what's actually true. And for me to come out and say it, I was saying it based on what we knew about a similar, so influenza is a similar virus. I am in no way, shape, or form saying influenza is COVID. They're different viruses, but they're both similar in structure and they're both transmitted similarly. So they're both single-stranded RNA enveloped viruses that are transmitted through aerosol. And I knew from day one when they were talking about COVID in droplet form that something was off. I'm like, no, open a book on virology. Like I have books on my bookshelf from medical school that say that coronavirus are aerosolized. You can't get around an aerosolized virus. I don't care how many masks you wear. If you're in an apartment complex, they had this happen with SARS-1. There was an apartment complex adjacent to a hospital and everyone got sick. They believe it came through the air duct system being blown out of the hospital and then blown into the apartment complex next door. So that's how aerosolized this could be, and how wings of hospitals were becoming ill when nobody who was sick or exposed had been near those wings. And so this is how easily these viruses, and now this virus is 20 times more transmissible than the original. So there's just absolutely no hiding from it in any way, shape, or form. It will eventually make its way to the individual. And I was trying to share that messaging hypothetically based on what we know about prior coronaviruses and what we know about actual studies in influenza viruses. So far as the other part that we weren't being told is those who are most obese and the same group of people who are most at risk and who we should have been protecting and informing and educating and helping: the frail, the elderly, the malnourished, the obese, the inflamed, the sickly. Those folks, not only, we know at least in studies with influenza and obesity that those folks actually have more receptors to bind more virus. They therefore, and they process the virus through their body in a way that often results in them being the super spreaders. What comes out of these bodies tends to be more virulent to their lean counterparts and cause more morbidity than what comes out of a lean. And we have this in mice and human studies with influenza. And I was trying to share this data and say, hey guys, because there were other doctors in the medical publications saying the same thing about COVID, saying, hey, we have data saying this, maybe we should be addressing this. This is real. And those papers were just dismissed. Those doctors were just ignored or were vilified and discredited.
Right.
And so this was early on information. And I was trying to say it too, like, we should be talking about this, not to point a finger and shame, but to say, hey, let's protect these folks and help them, because these are reversible conditions that we can have some impact on. I mean, immediately, when you immediately improve your lifestyle habits, things start to shift. So lots of different things there. I won't go on, but that information, these folks are also the ones that don't seroconvert well in the face of a vaccine. And so it didn't matter how many vaccines came out. I knew for a fact that these folks weren't going to do well with
when
the
you
vaccine.
say that, what does that mean exactly?
It means they don't produce a strong antibody response. So the vaccine doesn't actually protect them the way that it would protect their lean counterparts.
Right.
So not only are they most at risk, they're probably the most infectious to the population. Like, if you want to talk herd mentality, herd immunity, they're going to be the most infectious animals in the herd to others. And the vaccines, any vaccine, isn't going to work as well on them. And so they're not going to be as protected and potentially may become asymptomatic spreaders. So this is a problem. And I was trying to call out that problem early on, not to shame anybody, but to say like, hey, because my message has always been like, the only way out is through. We got to get in shape. We got to get in metabolic health so that we can endure this all together. This is the best path forward. And that was met with just a lot of pushback. And so here we are all these years later, and study just came out recently showing that morbidly obese folks, when the virus goes through their body, not only, and we don't know what the vaccine does, but I would guess it's similar. Not only do they not mount a healthy antibody response to the virus itself, they actually mount autoantibodies. So there are antibodies that should be helping them actually majority become autoantibodies, meaning they are being thrown immediately into an autoimmune state by the mere fact that they are living in a severely obese state. I mean, it's information like that, and I could go on, but we don't have time. It's just like, why weren't these people told that there was something that could be done to help them in the beginning? So that because the same group I just mentioned who fits those categories also happen to be the ones most inclined to long haulers.
Oh,
Again, this isn't like, of course, people will say, well, my friend is thin and healthy and she got long haulers. Yes, there are outliers, but generally speaking, those who are most susceptible to the virus are also the most infectious to others, are also the ones that don't seroconvert well to the vaccine, are also the ones most likely to get long haulers. So we have a big, huge mess because over 88% of Americans, US adults, are metabolically unsound, and nobody wants to talk about this. And they want to throw those of us who are trying to talk about it under the bus and call us names and accuse us of trying to be some kind of horrible person, when it's like the root cause, in my opinion, of the continuation of this is the poor metabolic health of our country.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And so much has come up or been circling through my head as you've been saying all this stuff. One of the things I've been thinking about is this latest COVID variant. Is it the BA5? Is that what they call it? Yes, right. So like, what's going on there? Do we have more cases now than we did in the peak of the pandemic in 2020?
I don't know about cases, but I do know that about 65%, like just yesterday, the CDC came out and said about 65% of cases are BA5, and then the rest are BA4. So these two variants have taken over. The thing people don't realize about Omicron is it did not come from a lineage. It didn't go Alpha, Delta, Omicron linearly. Omicron is like a complete offshoot, to the point where it's so different from the original COVID that we might want to call it its own virus. Like, we should start calling it Omicron and not COVID anymore, because it's totally different as far as variants go. And it is 20 times more infectious, or transmissible, I should say. Not infectious, I correct myself. Transmissible. Those are two different things. And then yesterday in that same article, they were saying the CDC was acknowledging that, I believe, or at least one of the scientists interviewed in that article in regards to the CDC was saying that the vaccine is 4 times less responsive to the vaccine than the original Omicron. And the original Omicron, if you look at that data, only was responsive to the vaccine, or I should say producing antibodies, for I think maybe 5-6 weeks max per booster. So if you got boosted when Omicron showed up, you had maybe 5 or 6 weeks of coverage. Now that's 4 times less effective. So this original legacy strain vaccine, which is what's being put out in the world, is essentially not that effective against Omicron, meaning it definitely doesn't stop transmission or infection. What it is doing is it is helping those who are super boosted from potentially having severe outcomes with death or dying. But even that's debatable if you actually look at the data. So supposedly they're staying out of hospital, but the tide is turning. And in several countries that are highly vaccinated, we're starting to see it definitely become a pandemic of the vaccinated. And we're always behind in the US because we started the vaccine push a little bit later. So we're just walking into that phase where I suspect in the next 2 to 3 months, this is going to clearly be a pandemic of the vaccinated. And the vaccinated seem to be, we have the data on this. They are, the vaccine itself is showing negative efficacy, meaning it actually makes you more susceptible to becoming infected with this strain. So if you're vaccinated, yes. So it's negative efficacy, meaning just what I said, if you have several boosters, your chances of contracting Omicron actually become higher, and put in different words. So it's just wild. Like, this is where we're at. And there's lots of reasons for this, but also the other thing is most viruses are supposed to become calmer and gentler and milder as they mutate, which Omicron did for a hot minute. But I believe this is my hypothesis and my opinion, and others share this as well, looking at the data, that the virus has kind of gone backwards in its virulence. Omicron was like the saving grace because it was staying in the upper respiratory tract, and everybody was like, yay, it's not going to the lower, we're over it. And if you became infected and recovered from Omicron, you sort of were inoculated. So that was good news. You were inoculated against the big bads. And I just thought, great. And I even made a podcast on it on my show and was like, Omicron's the off ramp. This is going to be great. Well, it mutated backwards and it has become less friendly and it's become more fit, which is not supposed to happen in nature, but it has happened with this. And I believe, again, this is my opinion, it is due to the vaccine campaign, the heavy evolutionary push on the virus by all of the humans being so heavily vaccinated, or the bulk of humanity being vaccinated. And now this variant is going into the lower lungs, more like Delta. So it's become more virulent to the original Omicron, which is very bad news going into fall and winter, in my opinion.
Oh, we're going to talk about that. But for anyone who is listening, whose head is completely spinning right now, because mine's spinning a little bit, and I followed you and all of this for a long time. You said you have a Substack and you have a podcast, and I know you share so much valuable information, right? Like, can you just talk about that for a minute so that people have references?
Oh, thank you. So I have an email list where I'm trying not to talk about the virus so much anymore. I'm trying to talk about it all on my Substack. And the stuff about the virus and the vaccine is actually behind a paywall at this point, because I just am so tired of getting yelled at by people. So it's a very inexpensive paywall, and it just allows me to break down in real time. And I have not put together hopefully by the time this is published or this podcast comes out, it'll be there, but I'm trying to put this together and get my thought process, because it's happening so quickly, what's going on. Normally I can keep up, but man, the studies are just every single day, the news gets worse and worse. And I don't want to be the flag bearer of bad news anymore. It's just getting very depressing. And so I try to cover it on my podcast, and I have definitely extensively covered the pandemic early on. At this point, I think what we're looking at is I am more concerned about this winter than I am when the original COVID hit. And I am most concerned about the heavily vaccinated. Again, my opinion, my hypothesis, my thought process, but I have the data. When I put the data together and I piecemeal it together, many other great minds agree with me, including virologists and immunologists and vaccinologists. This isn't just my opinion. I'm getting it by learning through their teachings about how immunology works and virology works. But I think that what we're going to see is a mass failure of these boosters. Although Pfizer and Moderna says they're coming out with a variant specific vaccine in the fall, which, we'll see how that goes. But at the end of the day, again, going back to metabolic health, those most susceptible are still going to be most susceptible no matter what they're shooting into them. And so the messaging needs to shift to getting your health house in order. It doesn't matter where you're at. Doesn't matter what level you're at. We're not striving for perfection. We're striving for 1% better every day, right? Like, we've had 2.5 years and the messaging was get your shot and your donuts and your free beer and it's going to be okay. And that was the worst thing they could have possibly done to us. They should have said, get your shot and get your shit together.
Yes. There's a level of personal responsibility that's involved in all of this. There's no doubt.
Absolutely. And yes, there are all kinds of circumstances that people live in. And I'm somebody who lived with chronic illness and talk about frail and chronically ill. I've been there, but it's a rebuild. And then there's the argument, we don't have time. We always have time. We've had 2.5 years, if not now, when, right? And so what I'm saying is, I think what's coming may potentially, just based on the immunology of it, which I won't go too deep into here, but I think Omicron as it is going to be a walk in the park for those who have natural immunity. Not to say that they're fully protected, because it seems like natural immunity may be waning, because this is like I said, it's such a different kind of variant. We really shouldn't even call it COVID anymore. So if you've had Delta, you'll have some protection with natural immunity and you'll have some protection with the vaccine, but not completely. So I think we're all looking at a fresh virus, so to speak. And so but it seems to be quite more gentle and mild on those who are non-vaccinated. That's, again, hypothetical at this point, just looking at data points and signals. I don't have any hard, fast studies to back that up as we speak, but every time I make these predictions, I always end up with a study a few months later proving it. So I think that the vaccinated, so long as they're healthy, again, just like it was with original COVID, there was a 99% chance or more that you were going to make it through if you had good metabolic health. So I think the same holds true here. That's not to say you might not get sick and have a few days of downtime. But I think if you're unvaccinated with an intact immune system, because an immune system is like a big orchestra, right? It's got all the players. And so all of those players are critical. For the vaccinated, all they have is a bass drum. one
Yeah.
big booming bass drum. And it's a bass drum that's completely out of tune with this new song, I think is the simplest way to put it. And so, and can they get their natural full orchestra back? Sometimes no, sometimes not at all, actually, especially if the first time their body saw anything to do with this virus, if it was in the form of the vaccine, their immune system is now programmed for that. If they had COVID and then got vaccinated, they might have some natural immunity intact. And so I can't say, and I'm not trying to alarm anyone. The point is we have to be looking at metabolic health at the very least for everybody to be able to withstand. And that's not even to mention how weird influenza and RSV are behaving. There's other viruses right now that are behaving very uncharacteristically, out of season, increased virulence. And it's because we busted natural order to some degree through lockdowns, through isolation, through vaccine campaign. We've busted the herd immunity of the overall of humans. We've kind of done some damage there, I think, again, my opinion, with this vaccine. And so we're looking at weird resurgences of viruses that are happening uncharacteristically out of season. Omicron is no longer happening in waves either. I saw an article this morning saying we're on the 7th wave. We're not. We're just on. Omicron is just on, and it will remain on forever at the current state of the immune status of the human species. And so, again, my hypothesis and my thought process here, but we're not seeing peaks and valleys. We're just seeing, you can go look at Google, right? Look at the stats. It just is like tick, 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 just upticks. There's no more valleys. And so moving forward, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. That's just where we're at. And sucks.
Yeah, it does. It totally sucks. And it makes me think a lot about what you talk about. I know you somewhat jokingly talk about how you're preparing for the zombie apocalypse and you want everybody to be doing the same. And you've mentioned metabolic health, you've mentioned resilience, but like, why is it so important right now, like so critically important to be resilient health-wise and metabolically?
So the two things if I could take all the studies that I've looked at over the past few years, the two things I could point to consistently that put you at highest risk for any virus. See, I personally have been taken out by viruses, and I personally struggle with pneumonia frequently, seasonally in the winter seasons, until I finally got my health house together. And even then those are my weak points because it's happened so many times. But that was kind of my song for 10 years, was like a bad virus would come through and I'd get hammered and everybody else would be fine. Or I'd get pneumonia and everybody else would be fine. Or they would just like get a little something and Tina's out for the count. And so through my journey, I've taken it upon myself to pack on like a good 10 pounds of muscle and really make sure that I got my metabolism in check. I was one of those skinny fat girls. So I was just like underweight and metabolically unsound, which is a far more dangerous place to be than being obese and metabolically unsound. We think of metabolic dysfunction and we think of your typical kind of overweight diabetic folks, but really these super thin women with no muscle mass, that they have much higher rates of mortality when it comes to all causes of death than their heavier counterparts. And I was in that group. So
why is that?
They got nothing.
Because they got nothing. Okay.
They got nothing to go on. And a lot of these viruses, including COVID, are wasting viruses. They induce an inflammatory response that's wasting. So you got nothing to waste from. Right. If you've got, and if all you're packing around is bone and fat, I mean, I was still in the same pair of jeans I wore in high school, but it was just fat and bone. There was no muscle. So that fat can be very inflammatory and not terribly helpful in the face of an infection. We need muscle for many, many reasons. We need muscle to keep our immune system revving and our metabolism in check. And your immune system and your metabolism are two sides of the same coin. Mike Mutzel is the one who really shared that terminology with me. And I thought it was so poignant and spot on. Right. So anywho, we don't want to go into anything too frail. These are the 2 points I would point to in the studies: frailty and blood sugar dysregulation. So that's it. Like if you're metabolically unsound, which is in 2019, a study came out showing 88% of Americans were metabolically unsound. And that was in 2019. That was pre-pandemic. And the rates of type 2 diabetes have skyrocketed since the pandemic started because everybody locked down and gained weight. I mean, the average American gained like 29 pounds since pandemic started. And then you've got frailty, which is why we're seeing the elderly have such a difficult time. why we're seeing, why we're seeing those who are just small kind of waste away. And you and I know people who were frail going into this and had a hard time, right?
Yeah.
And we know folks who were heavier set and had a hard time. So it's a matter of metabolic flexibility, because the virus itself, many viruses do this. So let's not talk about this in terms of COVID. Viruses in general invoke an inflammatory response. That's that dreaded cytokine storm. If you're walking into an infection of any sort and you're in a pro-inflamed state already, which most humans are in the world, unfortunately, we've exported our diabetes everywhere, then it's not too hard to turn that fire on. Once that fire is on, once that cytokine storm starts going, there's really nothing doctors can do to turn it off. They can mitigate it in the beginning stages, but once it's on, like you hear about people having COVID and like day 6 to 10 is the real dicey time. That's because that's when your secondary immune system kicks on and the cytokine storm really starts revving. If it goes, it goes. And I think of it like a catalyst. Remember in chemistry, when you'd have a reaction going and you throw the enzymatic catalyst in and it would shoot up.
Yes.
That's exactly what's happening with people's cytokines. So that's the problem. We don't want to walk in as a cytokine factory. And guess where your cytokines come from? They come from your visceral fat. They come from your fat cells. So walking in with a suit of cytokines on this is why I have been a proponent of weight loss, not because I'm a fat shamer, but because it's literally your ACE2 receptor hub, which is binding all the virus, and it's your cytokine factory. So it's really important that people understand this message, because that's what is making them susceptible to the cytokine storm. It's not the virus killing people. It's their immune systems, their own immune systems going rogue and freaking out. And that's something that doctors don't have a lot of control over once it really starts going.
Right. As we saw with so many cases where people ended up in the hospital, and that was kind of the end of the line.
Yes.
For so many of them.
Yes. And that's the critical part.
Right. And so like, in terms of one thing, I know you're talking about metabolic health. You're talking about obesity. Do you feel like one of the big focuses should be on building muscle, on weightlifting?
Yes, because frailty puts you in a pro-inflammatory state. So if you look at old folks, they just get more and more frail and they get more and more inflamed. It's just something that happens. And as that inflammation increases and as we age, so does our propensity for metabolic dysfunction. They go hand in hand.
Right. Especially for women, just so everyone knows, perimenopause. I feel like that's a really important point to bring up here in our 40s.
Totally. As I've been going through the past few years, texting you, going, what is going on?
Same.
Yeah, it's good times.
Good times. Mm-hmm.
So frailty and obesity both will put you in a pickle with inflammation, and inflammation will put you in a pickle with metabolic syndrome, which will put you in a pickle with COVID, or about any virus for that matter. So yes, muscle is the panacea to all of this. The more muscle mass you have on your body, the more well-trained that muscle mass is. Muscle is more than just something that makes you look hot, and it's more than something that holds your bones together. It's more than something that moves your bones. It's basically, think of it as a metabolic endocrine hub of goodness for lots of reasons. And it's what holds everything together. And so having good muscle mass keeps you from frailty. It's the opposite of frailty, right? And having good muscle mass burns fat. So it's the opposite of obesity. Those who build muscle will begin to burn fat naturally, just as an afterburn effect, not even during the muscle building exercise, but after. It's literally it's the non-negotiable anti-aging panacea, in my opinion. And so we have to be actively if you're not actively building muscle 2 to 3 times a week, you are, in my opinion, in trouble for all kinds of chronic degenerative illness, not just acutely, but chronically. If you're not actively building muscle on a regular basis, you probably don't have enough muscle, is another way to put it. And you're probably kind of sitting on the edge of metabolic syndrome like many Americans are. So that's the big take home, is how do we offset this? Give a damn of what you put in your mouth, eat like you give a damn, right? And start building muscle. Those 2 things alone can be life-changing for people. And then we could simply add in walking after meals to help your metabolic processes work better. Going to sleep on time and getting up at the same time every day is critical, because your sleep actually drives your metabolic health. If your sleep is off, you will go into an insulin resistant state transiently. We've seen it in the data. And keeping your stress under control, which can be hard with how screwed up everything is right now. But taking a very hard look at your job or your partners or your family unit, or where are you living? How is this going? And what changes can you make? Because being chronically stressed out will also completely hijack your metabolism. Most people don't realize that. And then something you said, which is why I wanted to come on this podcast, is everyone talks about hormonal balance. And I know you're going to come on my podcast and double down on this, but like everyone, oh, hormonal balance, but hormonal balance doesn't mean a damn if your metabolism is jacked up. Like that's literally the root cause of the hormonal imbalance. So
exactly. all the hormones are talking to each other, just so you guys know.
Yeah. So anyone trying to sell you pills or cleanses or detoxes or all this nonsense to balance your hormones, or like eat this salad to balance your hormones. It's like, put some freaking protein on it and go lift some weights too. You know, not to say the salad isn't the answer, but like, it's not the whole answer, right? We need the whole picture to get the metabolic health in order so that the hormones will stop fighting each other. And so that's the big picture. I mean, there's more to it, of course, but these are all things that are not only within people's control, but only within people's control. That's the part, I think, going back to your original question, why don't people want to hear this? It's because the onus of responsibility at the end of the day is on them.
Yes. I mean, I think that this is such an interesting time because I feel as though the messaging, like you said, the narrative has very much been about, well, just do this thing and we'll be fine, or you'll be fine. And there hasn't been a deeper dive or a root cause analysis of what's really going on. And I think you said something in the very beginning too about why we were so impacted in the US, particularly versus in other countries. I know in other, before the vaccine came about, where you were just like, well, this is just kind of a tinderbox because we have so many underlying health problems or comorbidities, as they're referring to it as. And so we were just sort of like ripe for having a really exaggerated effect, or the virus having a really exaggerated effect on our bodies.
Right. And if you look at all these comorbidities that are listed in the studies on the CDC's webpage, what is the root cause of the majority of those, or the majority of, like, every single one of them has the same root cause, but like to what degree? It's about 99% in all cases is due to metabolic
inflexibility.
Yeah. Metabolic dysfunction.
Right. Exactly.
And what does allopathic modern medicine have to offer for metabolic dysfunction?
I mean, medications and weight loss surgery, basically.
Yeah. They have nothing.
Yeah.
They have nothing. Yeah. So they couldn't make it. They couldn't, eat less and exercise more. That's their answer, which is a misnomer. I mean, yes, that's part of it, but that's not all of it, right? By any means. And that's a really defeating thing to do to somebody without giving them all the information, but they don't have all the information. This reminds me of when people on Instagram get mad at us and say, well, doctors don't run enough labs. It's like, because the doctor doesn't know how to interpret those labs. You're asking for labs that have to do with specialty metabolic functional medicine. And most doctors don't have a clue how to put those together beyond what their training was, which, trust me, was shit. It was when it comes to this, right? I mean, give me a surgeon any day from an allopathic training model, please save my life. But when it comes to just like how to care for yourself, they don't have any tools, and they'll be the first to admit it. I have lots of MD friends. I love them dearly. They'll be the first to admit, like, hey, we don't have a clue. We don't have a clue what to tell somebody when someone's sitting in our office here's the classic, right? You're 50 pounds overweight, you're middle age, you've got a tire around your waist, your blood pressure's going up. Maybe you're starting to show some signs of gout, maybe some, brain, dysfunction in the form of forgetfulness and some memory lapses. Maybe your hormones are starting to dump out, but you're too young to be in the geriatric category, which is where it used to show up.
Right.
So that's what they learned in the school textbooks and their medical training. It was like, this is when these people show up with this stuff, not your 35 to 45-year-old, which is the bulk of, I mean, the people in my age group are a hot mess.
Yeah.
The bulk of folks it's not good, right?
No.
Like you go to your reunion and you're like, whoa, how's your diabetes going? And I'm not saying that to be unkind. It's just like, nobody was in our food supply. If we want to blame anybody, let's blame big food. Let's blame Kraft and Procter and Gamble and the big companies who poisoned our food supply. But that's a whole other conversation. It's just, this is where we're at.
No doubt.
But this is where we're at. And people I'm hoping through this messaging we'll understand that it doesn't matter what your government's telling you. It doesn't matter what your health authority, do whatever makes you feel safe. I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. I'm not saying don't mask up and stay away from people. If that's what makes you safe, good for you. But at the very least, know that it is all contingent on your metabolic health at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. I think it comes back to the sort of messaging that I share with the women in my community a lot, that the story you've been told that you have no control, and that that this is it, this is your lot in your life, like you're kind of just screwed, is just, it's not true. And so there's just so much myth busting, I think, that has to go along with the work that we do. And I truly see this every day in women's health. I'm like, this doesn't have to be the rest of your life. Like, you can change this. There's so many things you can do. It might not be gone 100%, but you can have quality of life back. And so I feel it's the same with all of this as well with COVID. We've been fed this lie that we're just like, we should just get a vaccine and wear our masks and kind of just do that forever. And there's really been nothing else.
Right. It was the be afraid and be a sitting duck narrative.
Yeah.
Which I just am vehemently against.
Same.
So I think that's why I have gotten so much pushback, is because from day one, I was like, no.
Yeah.
I do not accept that.
You rejected that shit. Yeah.
Because I'm living proof. I have lived it. I was chronically ill. I was riddled with autoimmune diseases. I was so frail in my early to mid 30s that if I fell over, I was going to shatter into a million pieces. I was a wreck, a complete wreck. And here I was, a brand new grad with a medical degree, and I was a complete wreck. And I rebuilt, right? And so I encourage others to rebuild, and I try to create content so that they can find the answers to rebuild. And that's my message, is like, get your shit together if you want to. If you don't, if you want to yell at me, if you want to be a victim, if you want to blame somebody else, I am not for you. But if you're ready for the tough love and you like my delivery, game on, then that's who I'm here for, right? And that's all we can do, is at the end of the day, just try to stay true to our voice and our truth.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So where can everybody find all your good information? Because you guys, Tyna delivers. You got some real good stuff.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful for you too. I want to say that before I let everyone know where to find me, because you've just been such a guiding light for me through this pandemic. And it's you and Nicole, Carrie Jones, that it's like the triad of the texting group that we have that's really kept me sane through this pandemic. So it's been awesome. And I'm glad to say that we're all on the same page. So my content is best found, probably follow me on Instagram. I would love it. I'm always in a shadow ban, so I could always use a new follower there. And then check out my Substack. It's just Dr. Tyna. It's called, I have a cute name for it. I can't even think of it right now. And I try to just, like I said, keep up with the virus there. And then of course, get on my email list, because I talk about resiliency and health and all of the solutions inside my email list and my content on my website at drtyna.com.
Amazing. Okay. This is so good. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really am so grateful for you coming on and talking about all of this and just providing a different perspective. And again, for everyone who's listening and your head is potentially spinning, just remember that there's been a lot of censorship around, all of this information. And Tyna talks about this extensively. You've talked about this on your Instagram, and you obviously said you're in a constant state of shadow ban. And so there's, a lot of information that people haven't seen. So just everyone keep that in mind when you're listening to all this information, and please check out Tyna's amazing work and information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at NicoleJardim.com/quiz.